Thanks, Harold. When Harold asked me if I would come down and explain how they got the inspiration for fiddle, I tried to pass it on, but no one would seem to accept it. And I thought those lions must be awful deep down in the barrel. I've had books down there twisting tails. And my wife feeding you asked me to come down and speak. But when I thought of it, I realized that Harold just began to realize where the talent was. And to bring you up to this tape, I really think chronologically, I've got to go back to North Anson in 1904 when my father built a cannon factory. And really before that, because, pass that around, father wasn't born until 65, but one of the first cannon factories, particularly in the state of Maine, was built in his hometown, North Anson, in the neighborhood of 1880. And when he was about 12 or 15 years old, John Winslow Jones, who was a nephew of John Winslow, who has the fame of being the first convict in the state of Maine, came in and wanted to hire a team to go around and talk to the farmers in order to find out how much he could get for corn. My dad was to drive him around, which he did. And from that, he went to work in the cannon factory as a can maker. I'm just going to pass this, and for God's sake, let me have it back, because it's the only one around now. I did have about a couple dozen of them, sent them to the Springfield Edition as an exhibit, and the state never got them back to me. From that cannon trade, he came to Wilton, and as a lot of you may know, I'm sure of the cannon factory at Wilton, which is on the site of the woolen mill, where he made cans up until 1904, which takes us the time that he built the factory in North Anson. And there is a picture as foreman of the cooking room. You can pass it around if you want. In the factory on the side of the woolen mill, and that was operating up until 1901, and the Goodspeeds took it over. Now to get back to dandelions in North Anson. His old records show where he purchased or had a farmer raise for him, and he bought 2,700 pounds of dandelions from George Spaulding. I don't know what he paid for, but he canned those at $3 a case, and they were sold to C.A. Weston in Portland. In 1905, there was a load of 4,800, a little better than 2 tons. And apparently there was a little inflation just prior to that time, because these only sold for $2.70. Then in 1911 or 12, I guess, we come over here to Wilton, which was my mother's hometown, and Dad found her here while he was making cans at the town to Dryden. And in 24, he found a sack on the Ed Hardy place over in McCullough's Corner. Had it brought down there on our lot on High Street, and he started custom canning. And most of you can remember Don Briggs for years, 3 or 4 or 5, had tried to get Dad to go up to Rangeley and get the wild dandelions, which covered the hillsides up there. I came down here from New York State in 28, and we finally did go up to Rangeley, and $1 a pound for digging, and $1 a pound for bringing them down. And we have had over 2 tons come down in one load in 29, 30, 31. to remember the first pack. A traveling salesman for Tritchell and Chaplin in Portland stopped on his way back. He learned up there that we were canning dandelions. And he got us to promise that we wouldn't sell a case till he got to Portland and informed us that they could buy canned dandelions. He himself would have taken every case we could have packed, which at that time was something like 9,000 cases. We never heard from him. So most of that first pack went to 7 wholesalers in Bangor. There's only one today. Back in that day, 7. And S.S. Pierce, Boston. And S.S. Pierce, for 40 years, was one of our prime customers for dandelion greens. Then came World War II, and children could earn more money doing something else than digging dandelions. So we had to begin thinking of cultivating dandelions. 2 at that time. Cans were allocated for more essential foodstuffs, and we could have only a certain percentage of the cans that we used to be able to put dandelions in. To assume a bigger can, which would hold a larger quantity, and therefore cut down on the tin plate. So here's 40 to 44. Our dandelion pack was very, very meager. But meanwhile, we were trying to learn how to cultivate dandelions. And Mr. Mosier was one of our prime contracts. How many did you have for that? 2 acres in that, didn't you?
I had 3 acres one time.
3 acres at one time. And during that spell, we had between 8 and 10 at times. Because they were harvested by hand, and we knew no better than to cut them off below the ground. The cultivated greens at first was only 1 crop in May. Then we learned we could get the second crop off in September, which increased our production some, cut down on acreage a little bit. We knew about a prior to that time, but something like $1,200 or $1,300, and Wells didn't have that money. So it went along until 62. We located 2 harvesters down in Kenny Bort, isn't that right? $400, and we got the 2 of them. From there, we cut dandelions off above the ground, and we have had 6 crops off in one season, 5 in onward, which permits us to cut our acreage down by less than half, increases our production from what was 800 to 900 cases up to 25. Along the way, I did want to mention the fact, I'm not trying to be egotistic, but what, in, Keen ought to remember, when did we get the A award, Keen?
43, I think it is.
43. And that was for our effort in producing during the World War. Not necessarily for quality, but for producing. And we were one out of 407 in the United States to get that award. I'm a little proud of it. In 1967, a gentleman from Madison with the name Long, who at that time was raising dried beans, and in this particular year decided to put beans in the ground, sugar beets, for a roosting, and approached us to pack the tops, which they had to thin out in the process of raising sugar beets. And he also found some islands in the cover which were loaded with fiddleheads, and that went along with the beet greens. So our first experience in canning fiddleheads was back 67. And I've forgotten the tonnage, but we did pack 200 cases of fiddleheads that year, plus 600 cases of sugar beets, plus our dandelions. We thought we were going places. But the next year he decided beets were out the question, and took too much time to get the fiddlehead, so there was a year lapse. But in the spring of '69, Donald and Avis from Old Orchard Beach, who for 20 years had been going up into Waterbury, Vermont. Trip was a business trip up there, but along the way they had found fiddleheads in the valleys and swales. They both were from Aroostook, and anybody from up there knew fiddleheads. So they were going back every spring pretending to fish after that and gather fiddleheads, took them back to Old Orchard and either gave them away or sold a few or whatnot. But after 3 or 4 years, they decided why not commercialize. So they approached us in the spring of 60, sometime 69, so that in 70, they harvested enough fiddleheads, so we packed 932 cases of number 303 cans, 18,400 10-ounce packages. The idea at that time was to freeze some, prepare some fresh so that they could go back into, he had Shaw's Market primarily in mind, and Hannaford. His freezing apparatus didn't work out too well, and he lost too many to continue that idea, although he's coming up with it this next. In 71, we packed 1,500 cases, which is something like 40% increase, plus 1,200 packages. From then on, it's been strictly canning. 1,677 cases in 72, and 531 this last year. Now, for these gentlemen out there, all about the fiddleheads and dandelions, it took some publicity along the way. At first, I believe, was from, and we had a little bit, the New England Homestead, which had to be 10 years. And then there was a paper, Boston Herald, I believe, and so on, but it primarily came in 71. How many of you have read the story about us in this? A lot of you, but any of the didn't can look at it. That's
Yankee?
Yeah. And just to show you how this stuff mushrooms, and due to the fact, not because we're canning it, but due to the fact that the fiddlehead is unique, and the dandelion not unique, because that goes back something like 500 years before Christ. And according to Greek mythology, a young lady took dandelions and onions to an imprisoned boy for a treat. So they go back a long ways. But from that, in a Yankee magazine, I'm going to read you a letter that was picked up by a gentleman in Dorsey Plantation Woods, which is close to Detroit, Michigan. He is writing the Yankee magazine. Your present issue included an article covering a Wells dandelion canning in Wilton, Maine. The papers were removed from our issue and forwarded to a Mr. Marshall Wells, founder of radio station WJR, Detroit, primarily because of a coincidence of names and also presumed interest related to Mr. Wells' daily farm program, 5:05 to 5:50 each week. This has been very interesting sequel. They, the Yankee Publishing Company, sent Marshall Wells in Detroit a complete issue of the Yankee, and for a long time, he, there must have been 10 days of such a matter that we were getting from around Detroit, clear down into Iowa and so forth, concerning that broadcast. And at the same time, the editor of the Denver Post wrote an editorial. And from that day, probably 125 to 300 or 400 letters a year, every correspondence concerning the fiddleheads, what will we ship them for, and so on. Then in last June, a phone call from Augusta asking if I had time to give him a little history of our canning operation. He didn't tell us, a Universal Press reporter, and I hurriedly, because I was eating dinner between the shop and canning dandelions, so it was hasty. But from that, I have got clippings from 35 different papers all over the United States concerning the story of dandelions. It was, no, I won't say it was picked up in my life, because that story, April this year, if any of you have an opportunity to read it, tells about this Mr. and Mrs. Briggs, the Methodist. They were with us this last weekend, and they brought in another publication called Youth, published in Philadelphia, story of their harvesting fiddleheads. Now that tape there had to be from some of the newspaper clippings that circulated out around the newspapers in Los Angeles, San Francisco Chronicle, or some of those. But perhaps I can give you a little of the impact of all this publicity. I reckon I didn't try to dig up any statistics on what we had shipped prior to this time, but this year we have spent $609 just on parcel post and shipped 140 cases through the mail, and all the way from Hawaii to Key West, Port Kilimar. In between that area, there are some states that we haven't shipped to, but they're darn few. I've got some material here that goes back. That's the first dandelion label that came out. Any of you interested in looking at it? I think that's it, boys. And I thank you. Thank you. Until around 9.
I know at that time they said they would get it back.
That tin come in boxes they weighed 100 pounds, and they were about 2 inches. And for a number 2 can, probably 18 or 20 by 14. And the cans were stamped out with steel die.
Well, incidentally, one of the first jobs I ever left home to do was go to Sparrowsport, Maryland, which was the side of a tin factory, and we made wooden crates to pack that tin in.
You did?
The size of that weighed about 100 pounds, and the depth of those was caught the size that weighed about 100
That's
pounds.
right. Well, with this caught with the size of the tin.
Bethlehem Steel people was making it.
Another interesting thing, Carl, we just look at that. I haven't got one of our, doesn't have to. 10 years ago, Charles Stewart, the Murison Label Company, came into our factory and to sell us a label. And when he wanted to look at our old one, he saw the first one at Carl. He says, I stood next to that man that drew the engraving for that label. And it wasn't his company. At that time, it was the American Lithograph Company in Baltimore. But that's how small the world is. Murison Label is in Peoria, Illinois. But he finally came up with the label that we're using at present, and it cost me nothing for the engraving.
Vance, did they come up with a way to pick fiddleheads anyway except by hand?
No, not yet. They can be picked, Linwood, 2 or 3 times, the same spot.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't know until recently that I'm going to kill them because the seed portion of that plant doesn't mature until July. In other words, you pick the outside group of them. Your nucleus is in the center.
What was that shop up on New Street? An old building up on Canal Street, right?
C.G. Sawyer.
They can.
They can't corn there. After this one turned into a woolen mill, C.G. Sawyer was that one up on.
You can seal by hand then. You can seal
All by hand.
All by hand.
I can just remember I could make that can myself if I had the equipment at the time, because I was probably 8 years old when I seen my. But this is all sorted by hand. This is sorted by hand around here.
Cover.
And that. And it might be interesting just to show you the difference. These cans were filled in corn. They were filled cold. Then put into the retort to heat up and drive the air out. So they had, after this was sealed on top, they had to put the hole in the center and punch it. Let the air out. 20 minutes before they could ever get that closed up and solder again. And then went back into retort for the center and cooked again. Called it spizzling. And
How many cans could a good tin knocker make in a day?
I haven't any idea. I should know. father made enough of them. And he probably's got some books there that I know he has. He's probably
Probably
got,
made, is it a slow, pretty slow process?
I'm going to guess that he might make, no. Yeah, more than that. Yeah, he'd do better than that because each man had a process of his own. One made the body, somebody else had this part, and somebody the rest of it. This went into and just floated like that by hand. They could make, huh?
Oh,
Yeah? Many?
50 to 60 cans per day.
Come on. Oh, that's all? I don't know how much they got, but they didn't get rich. George Thomas, if any of you know him, was probably the last can maker in the state.
That's the Thomas and Mark.
Yeah, Thomas and Mark.
The Weathering Brothers, they made cans after George Thomas. Who? Weathering Brothers, that family. That can shop was built way back in the 1800s. Weathering Brothers down on this side of the Bald Road.
They burnt down before George died.
Oh yeah, they had, that I made the can.
Yeah.
They made that go down.
Have you any other questions to ask? Not, we'll say in closing, we are grateful again to Vance for bringing us up to the minute on Fiddlehead Greens.
You're welcome.